The infamous Nazi doctor and war criminal Josef Mengele, known for his medical experiments at Auschwitz and spending 34 years on the run, from January 1945 till his death in 1979, drowning in a river in Brazil. At one stage, with the Simon Wiesenthal Centre offering a $100,000 reward for information regarding his whereabouts. Even after the doctor had died, the public and top Nazi hunters still believing him to be alive, not until DNA testing in 1992 conclusively proved that the body exhumed in 1985 was really Dr. Mengele. But during all his years hiding from the law, where was he? What did he do for money? Why was he never caught? We'll delve into this and more. During his 34 years on the run, working many jobs, and at one point having an illegal medical practice in the 1950s, practicing medicine in Buenos Aires under his real name, specialising in gynecology and abortions. Immediately after the flee from Auschwitz in January 1945, transferred to a research facility near the Czech border, then joining a unit of retreating Wehrmacht forces, discarding his SS uniform to blend in with retreating troops. Mengele eventually moved into Bavaria, southern Germany, and was captured by American forces in June 1945, and was processed under a false name, possibly Fritz Ullmann. Being vain, he did not have the standard SS blood group tattoo on the left upper arm, and also Allied forces were slow to cross-reference the names of camp doctors with the extensive list of war criminals. He was released in August 1945. During the next 4 years, hiding in Germany under the false name Fritz Hellmann, taking a job of a farmhand and agricultural labourer, a significant step down from his previous high rank and academic career to a manual labourer. A financial support for the rest of his life would always be his wealthy family. The Mengeles, producing farming equipment, and being rather a wealthy family, would always send money to Mengele until his death, through the family lawyer Hans Sadelmeyer, not just a lawyer, but an executive and financial manager for the family company. Sadelmeyer would also prove vital to the finding of Mengele, though years after he died, when the German police searched the lawyer's house, finding countless letters and documents relating to Mengele, even the letter of his friends in Brazil writing to tell the family that he died of a stroke while swimming in the river. In the late 1940s, divorcing his wife and receiving money, particularly from his brother during this time, the family was under investigation from the Allies, but consistently telling investigators that he was dead, deciding to flee to South America through the use of the rat lines, leaving Germany and travelling to Genoa, Italy, and boarding the ship the North King, which took him to Buenos Aires, Argentina, arriving June 22nd, 1949. Travelling on the false name Helmut Gregor, initially staying in a modest boarding house upon arrival, where he claimed to be a medical technician and worked as a salesman for the German-Argentine distributor of his family farm machinery. This was a front for funds coming from the family. Into the mid-1950s, becoming ever more daring, and he began to practice medicine illegally. At this time, his primary wealth and stability came not from his job, but his steady financial transfers managed by the family lawyer Sadelmeyer, living a nice life at this time and often enjoying the opera, compared to his contemporary Eichmann in a poor house and a factory worker. In 1956, applying for an Argentine identity card under his true name, but just 3 years later, in 1959, the West German government formally indicted Mengele for mass murder and demanded his extradition from Argentina. But by May 1960, with the Eichmann capture by Mossad and the following kidnap to Israel, with the subsequent trial and execution, Mengele and Eichmann were good friends and regularly met for coffee. After the capture of Eichmann, the hunt for Mengele would reach its zenith. According to the team leader that captured Eichmann, Rafi Etienne, the agents knew Mengele was living in the same area of Buenos Aires and had located his apartment. However, because they were focused on extracting Eichmann without alerting Argentine authorities, they decided to wait to resume the hunt for Mengele. When the team returned to pursue him a few weeks later, they found that Mengele had successfully fled. In the time before Mengele had fled, he had travelled to Paraguay sometime around 1959 and had applied and been granted Paraguayan nationality, which provided a legal safety net, although still primarily based in Argentina. The Eichmann capture sent Mengele into a panicked flight into Paraguay, arriving May 11, 1960. The primary purpose of applying for citizenship under his own name made him technically immune to extradition from foreign countries. He had begun visiting Paraguay from his residence in Argentina in the mid-1950s, benefiting from the dictatorial regime Alfredo Stroessner, who was of German background and sympathetic to Nazi figures. He was a partner in a large hardware store between 1959 and 1965, which was reportedly connected to the family back in Germany, providing him with a legitimate source of income and a reason to be in the country, eventually growing more paranoid and living on a heavily fortified ranch near the town of Encarnacion in southern Paraguay, which is where the last ever confirmed sighting of Mengele by a Nazi hunter would be. An undercover Mossad agent viewed him on a farm talking with two other men. During his time in Paraguay, he occasionally still used his real name. The time in Paraguay would be very brief, and would also be the last time in his life that he would live openly and use his real name. The last 2 decades of his life would be marked by paranoia, loneliness, often moving location, and with the payments from the family beginning to dwindle, relying ever more from the charity of strangers. Mengele departed for Brazil from Paraguay is generally placed around 1960 or 1961, while the exact date is difficult to pinpoint due to his life in hiding, though some sightings and CIA documents suggest that he may have still travelled to or from Paraguay up until 1965. Choosing Brazil for its vast wilderness, the ability to live in seclusion under the radar from authorities, and large German-speaking populations, his first stay in Brazil would be at the Stammers farm from 1960 or 1961 to 1964 in Nova Europa. He was hidden by Hungarian immigrants Giza and Gitta Stammer on their coffee and fruit farm about 175 miles north of Sao Paulo. He worked there as a farmhand under the name Peter or Pedro Hochbleiten. The Stammers treated Mengele poorly, allegedly exploiting him for labour and taking money from him, despite him paying them a nominal rent for a separate house on their property. In 1962, his son Rolf visited him on the farm, and this is where we get our knowledge of how he lived during the time with the Stammers. Leaving them in 1964 and spending the rest of his life hidden by a wealthy Austrian couple, Wolfram and Liselette Bossart. Living near Sao Paulo, he had a new alias this time, going under the name Wolfgang Gerhardt, an old-time Nazi friend from Austria who returned to Europe and then died in 1978. When he left for Europe, giving Mengele his identity documents, living out the rest of his life under this name, even buried under it. Mengele kept a diary, and the vast collections of the writings, totaling over 3,000 pages, and notes come from 1974 to 1976, where we get a glimpse of his mental state. An entry in 1976 where he writes the famous line, quote mark, "What's going to happen now? I feel lonely, or rather abandoned, more painfully than ever," end quote. They help us to reconstruct his mental state at the end of his life, hugely paranoid and fearing capture, distrustful of most people. His finances had begun to dwindle, entirely dependent on the generosity of others. Into his final years of life, his family in Germany, while still sending him money, began to reduce the payments and left him feeling frequently destitute and panicky about his finances, having to pay the Boserts for his upkeep, making him completely reliant on their goodwill, kindness and secrecy of a small network of friends. Primarily the Austrian couple and their children who would manage his affairs, also at this time having a much younger girlfriend, who recalled many years later in a documentary filmed in the 1990s, Hitler's Henchman, how he was so kind to her, but his son Rolf, as well as his diaries, show how he remained utterly unrepentant about his crimes in Auschwitz and continued to adhere to his racist ideology and pseudoscience, his health ever failing, suffering from intense abdominal pains, spending the majority of his time alone, but still deeply involved with the Boserts family, even tutoring the children from time to time. While on a family trip and swimming in a river, he suffered a stroke while swimming and drowned. His body was recovered by the family. To protect his identity and prevent the discovery of the most wanted Nazi, they arranged for him to be buried in a small cemetery under the name Wolfgang Gerhardt. Mengele's death would remain a secret until 1985, when the house of his lawyer, Hans Seidelmeyer, was raided by police, and large volumes and letters and a trail of money to Mengele and the Boserts family was found, along with the letter to Seidelmeyer telling them that the doctor had died. The body was exhumed from the grave, and then a team from the US, West Germany, and Brazil conducted extensive analysis on the remains, determining with a high probability that the remains, most likely based on dental records and skeletal measurements, were that of Josef Mengele. Later, in 1992, a DNA test provided concrete proof compared to his son Rolf. Where is the body now? His remains are currently kept in the Sao Paulo Institute for Forensic Medicine and are used as teaching aids for forensic medicine students. Mengele harvested body parts from victims at Auschwitz to be used in German universities and now becoming a medical curiosity of his own. After 34 years on the run and becoming a slave to his paranoia, dependent on the charity of others, and a far cry from the power he once had at Auschwitz, his final reward was a stroke while swimming in the sea. Thank you for watching.